It is time to say a very good morning to the former Munster and Ireland international Keith Wood. Very good morning, Keith.
Morning, Shane. How are you?
Keeping well, keeping well. I know you've had a busy week. You've had, of all things, a Lions reunion this week.
I know, yeah, Lions reunion, 25 years from '97, which is it was wonderful. Actually, we're over in England, and we had the vast majority of the squad, coaches, support team were there. So it was wonderful, actually, poignant and wonderful in equal measure.
There was no getting back on the pitch to kind of recreate some of those big moments from '97. It was all, I'm sure, off-pitch antics.
Yeah, there were far more creaking bones than we had then, maybe. But it was, it was. Look, it was you have to mark those moments of your life, I suppose, and it was really interesting. We had poor Tom Smith, of course, passed away a couple of months ago, but his wife Zoe was over, which was amazing. And of course, we've Doddy with motor neuron disease, and he's fighting the best fight. I think he's raised for motor neuron in 13 or 14 million at this stage. It's been quite extraordinary. So, you have to take all of those opportunities to try and remember those great days, those great people. But it was extraordinary seeing guys that you haven't seen. So I would have seen some of them over the years with the BBC and kind of on that little bit of a circuit, but there's some guys I hadn't seen for 25 years. So it's still great to see some of the passion burning bright in it. I had the most wonderful conversation with Jim Telfer, 82 years of age, and I reckon he could still marshal the troops if he had to. The obsession and passion he still had was burning bright.
Doddy's been some inspiration, hasn't he? Like, I mean, I suppose it's been brought to the fore by Charlie Byrne in Ireland of late, but prior to that, even Doddy's just, I don't know, I can't think of another word, actually, just inspirational.
Yeah, I don't know how long Doddy has it. They call it a 3-year disease because most people don't survive past 3 years once you get it. Doddy is, I think it's about 6 years now for Doddy, and he's extraordinary. His family are extraordinary. His wife was with him, and one of his sons, which, it just kind of partly shows some of the family that has to be part of everything that has ever happened for anybody's life. But his courage is pretty extraordinary. But it's more than that. It's the smile. I mean, he's got this ludicrous grin and twinkle in his eye, and his speech is more halting now than it has been, but there still is pure humour in it. He wears it with an awful lot of grace, actually, and it's amazing to see him. It really was.
It's funny, like the old cliche, Keith, like you don't know what you've got until it's gone, and even, when you're in that moment in 1997 on that Lions tour, you're in the heat of the battle. You're probably not thinking about, looking back a quarter of a century later and enjoying those times that you had. But when you're sitting there at a reunion and you're seeing people like Doddy and having conversations, as he said, with people like Jim Telfer, it must put it all in perspective for you. Like you kind of appreciate what you had at the time.
Well, it's a little bit surreal. We were kids. We were 25. Well, I was 25. There was some of the guys were like Eric Miller was 21. Matt Dawson was maybe 23, 24, Jeremy Davidson the same. There was a huge amount of young guys in that team. You kind of forget that afterwards. And it was important. Look, it was an important part in our life, and you could see the level of emotion that was there for everybody. I mean, we're always kind of on the verge of an old tear, and there was the hugs and cuddles as you'd see every single time. It was just... And it was different. So we're all there with our wives, our partners. It's all, it's just nice, and it's a nice part of our history. It was a thing that was great 25 years ago, and it's a shared experience. Ian McGeechan had said a long time ago in that Lions video, but well, I would have said he said it to us, but it came out in the video that there'd be a time in 20, 30 years hence where you just you'd share a look across a room sort of thing. It was incredibly evident over the last few days, so it was fantastic.
Yeah, he clearly wasn't wrong in what he said. Like, very few Irish players on that 97 British and Irish Lions squad. You had Martin Johnson leading the surge as captain. Like, I'm thinking to Paul O'Connell, the great videos of Paul O'Connell in Lions dressing rooms rallying the troops. '97 was a different era. You don't have the cameras in the dressing room. You didn't have the social media age either. So a very different feel. But what was Martin Johnson's leadership like in that dressing room in '97?
Yeah, well, we did have cameras because we had the video that was in there. Not as if you'd see it live, but we had that Living with Lions video that came out afterwards. We had. It was very interesting because we were mostly amateur. We'd just gone professional a year or two, but we were still amateur. It was different because you do an awful lot of things right and you do an awful lot of things wrong, and you look back at it 25 years afterwards and you say, what would you do differently, and all that sort of stuff. Jono was an unusual character. We'd 4 Irish guys: Wally, Eric, Jeremy, and myself. And we would have followed Jono anywhere because he had a very calm authority. He didn't talk a huge amount. He actually didn't like talking, and he didn't think some of the other players would listen to him from the other countries. So he was quite happy for me to talk a bit. I was Irish captain, for Delalio to talk, for Rob Wainwright to talk, Ian Evans. He was without a shadow of a doubt the leader, but it was some way egalitarian. Everybody had a voice. There weren't too many voices, but there was always a voice from the corner if it was needed. So just deferred to him always, and pulled together afterwards.
It's funny, like I was watching a video the other day of Rio Ferdinand on TV talking about that great English generation of midfielders in the mid-2000s, when you had the likes of Gerrard, Lampard, Scholes, Carrick, Hargreaves. You had the best midfielders in the world all in one team. They were all leaders at their individual clubs, and yet when they came together at international level, they couldn't seem to transform it onto the pitch and become the team. But clearly, as you mentioned, the Lions squad, you had Johnson, you had Delalio, you had yourself as well, all leaders and captains and figures of authority within your own international setups. But clearly there was something within that Lions team and Lions teams since, it has to be fair as well, where those leaders kind of gel together and come together as one.
Well, I think you defer to the captain. Actually, that's what ultimately what happens, because you need to have one person that is the lightning rod for the rest of the players, for the rest of the leaders, whatever it's going to be. You can't be vying for that sort of attention. You just can't, and it's one of the things you kind of give up. I remember actually after Johnson retired, it was very interesting. After he retired from England, I was in the studio with him for the BBC, and England were playing Ireland, and Ireland beat England. And one of the reasons was there was 4 or 5 players for England who all thought they should have been captain. And whereas before Johnson was the standout captain, this time they were kind of almost vying for who made what decision and when. And it just took a period of time for them to get stability. And I mean, that can happen. And that's, sometimes you just need the right guy there in that jersey with the armband, because then you can follow him. It's if other people think they should be there ahead of him. Look, for me, he was the best captain I played under. I'd have followed him anywhere, and so that was one of the good elements for us. But also there was a freedom that was given. It was interesting. There's a great article today on cricket. Now, this is totally different from Mike Atherton, on Brendan McCullum's change as the coach for England, and that sense of sort of freedom of expression. We were given a template to play, but we were given a huge freedom of expression in '97. I know the game has changed an awful lot since, but you wonder sometimes whether some of that freedom of thought, of being able to make your own decisions at different times, whether that could be, back in vogue again at different times, because Atherton's piece is more along the lines of it being a change from the state of the fear of failing, and more sort of the joy and the expression of actually having a go, and trying to get the blend of that right nearly at the moment could be relevant.
Do you watch the game at times and pine for that, in the sense that you think it's almost too formulaic and too governed from above? Or
I do. I'm it's funny. I love the game, still love the game, and I love seeing it being expressed. And if it's played like chess, I think at times there seems to be not a lot of joy. There's a lot of efficiency in it. And I just feel sometimes under huge pressure, we tend to revert to slightly more conservatism, whereas you'd like to maybe revert to more freedom for it, and I wish I did it myself actually. So it's criticism on myself. I wish I'd enjoyed a bit more without having to take as much of the pressure that was there on it. I'd love to see. There's been a lot of talk recently about, partly because of Rassie Erasmus and the Lions tour last year, which was just rubbish with running on telling everything. I don't think anybody should have an earpiece going on there. I think water boys should be water boys like ball boys are. I don't think you should be directing the game from the sideline. I think that should be left to the players on the field. You want the leaders on the field to come to the fore and let them make their own decisions and rise or fall by it.
Are Ireland different, like post Schmidt, in that regard? Are they a little bit more sort of liberal or a little bit more free spirit?
I think they definitely are. I also think that I don't know that we could have been freer if we hadn't been through the Joe Schmidt era. I think there was a sense of discipline and attention that was very necessary. And I think Schmidt did an extraordinary job. But I think you can only do it in that fashion for so long. I think it then becomes harder to be energised by it. And I do think that Ireland have been energised by it. And I will say it's funny when you're looking back, because if we do a bit of a reflection on our season that we've seen from the provinces, that Munster for me have been too prescribed consistently. I thought Leinster and Ulster, who have had phenomenal seasons, like really, really good seasons until the last couple of weeks. And it's whether they reverted to try to be more conservative at that stage or not. But I felt that they didn't play to the standards that they could have played in the last couple of matches. Now, they were put under huge pressure to do so, but it seemed as if they tightened a lot at that stage. And again, that's that piece of freedom where you'd like to try and get to. But I don't know, it's very hard when you look at it. What gets you, the most successful thing that gets you to the last weekends of the year and then doesn't quite work because people stop you at source, that's pretty much what happened in all those ending games. So you want, it's funny, Leo Cullen made a comment. He said, we want to make certain that Leinster are true to their DNA. And I don't know that they were on the last couple of weekends. I thought they became a little bit, not predictable, but a little bit nervous, actually. And if they were true to their DNA, they'd have been having a cut constantly, and every pass would have hit their hands because they were on fire for most of the season. So it's trying to get that little added blend for the last few weeks, because I thought they were peerless for the whole season, bar the last 2 weekends.
We're creeping up nicely, Keith, towards this tour in New Zealand. Just under 2 weeks until that opening tour match against the Maori All Blacks on Wednesday, June 29th. Then, of course, those three tests against New Zealand on July 2nd, July 9th and July 16th, respectively, before returning home. Andy Farrell has named this 40-man squad. Some interesting inclusions, some interesting omissions, like 5 uncapped rookies. You have 12 players with less than 10 caps. What are the headline, I guess, omissions and inclusions from your end?
Yeah, and for me, I enjoyed looking at the squad. I enjoyed the youth that was brought into it. I do enjoy the amount of players that don't have a lot of caps. I think it's fantastic. We have midweek matches, and it's a long year, but the midweek matches offer an opportunity to blood players better, and I hope that they'll be blooded in some of them and may make the test team on the back of it. I look at this on the back of what's happened in the last month in provincial rugby, where we've been found out, but where we've been stopped at source. You'd like to see how Farrell can change the philosophy for that not to happen, and I think there is a bit more freedom actually in the Ireland squad. I think he plays with a lighter touch. Our coaches with a lighter touch. I think he seems to have that idea of pressure and freedom is there, and he hasn't been afraid to make mistakes, and that's one of those great things, because it's a kind of difference between excellence and perfection. If you're striving for perfection all the time, you're going to be grumpy, and because you're going to make mistakes. Whereas if you're going for excellence, you're just going to go for a very, very high standard and try and get there and achieve it, and you're going to make mistakes on the way. And it just feels like that is the case. It is incredibly daunting as a tour, but I think it's the best tour for us a year out from the World Cup. We get to find things out on this trip, and I think we've enough of time to make changes between here and the World Cup to try and get ourselves into a better position, because we've the worst group possible in the World Cup. very, very tough. We want to make a progression, and for that to be the case, something has to change, because we've always faltered at a quarter-final time, and it would be great to see if we could move past that, and I think that starts here.
It's funny how life comes at you so fast. Jack O'Donoghue being named Munster's Player of the Year this week. Like he won the second of his only 2 Irish caps in 2017, which is quite hard to believe. Joint top try scorer for Munster this season. An omission, but I guess, Keith, the problem for Jack is that he's in such a competitive position.
Yeah, I would have brought him, I have to say. I thought he was playing incredibly well earlier in the year. At one point, he was playing a lot better, I thought, than Peter O'Mahony. There's peaks and troughs in every season, but I'd like to see him get a run in a green jersey, because I do think he has different elements that fit in, and he's a big, hard, abrasive player, and we need hard, abrasive players. And I would have brought him on it, because nobody deserves it, actually. You get the chance, you don't get the chance, but I think he might flourish in this Irish squad. I do think this last year has been very difficult for Munster and Munster players, and I don't think that their style has suited Ireland in any way, shape, or form, and I think that's affected in selection. And I think he may be suffering a little bit from that. I just think he has some of the attributes that we require for Ireland.
The Harry Byrne inclusion is a really interesting one. I know Brian O'Driscoll spoke on the show last night about how he feels Harry maybe needs to play one of the tests. Clearly Johnny Sexton might not be capable of playing every single minute, and you have Joey Carbery there as well. But it's quite an interesting one. Like, he's only played 4 games at number 10 all season, Keith, but would you have included him as the backup number 10 if you were picking this squad?
I've nailed my colours to the mast very early, and it hasn't worked out yet. So I presumed Carbery would be the man, and the more he played, the better he'd get into it. I also think he suffers a little bit from the style under which Munster played this year. But he needs to raise his own game to get there. Harry Byrne has been talked about for 2 or 3 years as being the guy. He leapfrogged his brother, and I would say that that's correct. Because there may be more potential for Harry, and that's what you're dealing with, is potential. And so we know that Carbery can play very well. He hasn't played to the standard of an international this year, so he needs to get into Ireland camp, get confidence, get playing very well. I think the exact same for Harry Byrne. When people keep talking about who are we going to have in there afterwards, there's been a litany of players, and none of them have grabbed the jersey. There is talk about Kieran Frawley. I'd just like to see him play 10. I think he's more robust. But one thing I will say is, in the last couple of weeks, when Irish teams are put under huge pressure by bigger opposition, you then need to do something else, and that something else has to be playing closer to the line. And Leinster continued to play under huge pressure, but they played behind the gain line, and they were stopped behind the gain line. And so that requires a 10 to take it to the line. And at the moment, I don't know of any of the guys that are doing that. And that may be the issue for us, because that's the thing that needs to be unlocked. Because if everything is done behind the gain line, unless every pass is absolutely perfect, our teams seem to crumble somewhat. So they're put under too much pressure. The passes aren't good enough. A crumble for me is a pass that's a second longer to be passed across the line, because it's inaccurate. Because of the manner in which some of the teams play, it is that level of delay can ruin all the movement and can put you under pressure. And we need options to go for that, but nobody's putting their hand up. And I'd still say Johnny played some of the best rugby he's played. He doesn't have the pace of old, and that's an issue. His mind is still operating at a far higher level than anybody else around him. He just seems very, very calm within it. But people have to challenge him for the jersey, and it's not happening. So
is this a real crossroads in Carbery's career then, with the change in Munster and the fact that, he's just had so many injuries, so many false dawns? Is this the moment now where it needs to happen for him?
Yeah, I don't know that they're false dawns, because when he came on the scene at 2021, he was brought in to deliver at different times for Ireland and for Leinster, and he did it. Now, he did a lot of it from 15, but he did do it. And he was well able to play. Then he had a really bad injury. I thought he was finished a couple of years ago, and was very nearly finished. I do think that it was almost rushed back to play in that World Cup 4 years ago, and that seemed to take a long time to get over. Now every player wants to rush back, and it's how do you make those determinations, and they work sometimes, they don't work at other times. But it seems to have taken him a long time to get back to that idea. I don't know. I felt he'd kick on this year, and he hasn't. So that's something that needs to. It's maybe the change by going on tour, by being in camp. If I go back to 25 years ago, the joy of going on a tour, the joy of being in a room saying that this is all you're going to do for the next period of time, and there's a sense of freedom almost to that, to going in under management that know what it's like to play, actually, and know what it's like to win, which Farrell is an absolute born winner, and to see how those guys can work on the psyche of some of the players, on the technique of some of the players, and try to bring them to the level that we always hoped that they'd get to. And that's the difference. So we say potential for Harry Byrne, we say potential for Joey Carberry. Well, they haven't really shown what that potential is on the field. So that needs to happen on this trip.
Keith, great insight as always, and fascinating to get those 1997 Lions memories as well. Thanks a million.
Cheers, gents.